We begin our coverage with news from the ongoing African Development Bank Group meetings. The African Development Bank is seeking to increase resources for member countries for productive projects on the continent. To this end, President of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, is seeking approval from the board and partners to raise $33 billion to support more initiatives for member countries. Dr. Adesina was addressing board members, governors, and stakeholders at the opening ceremony of the bank's annual general meetings ongoing in Accra.
You have stayed with the fund. You have supported the fund. And your countries have been partners in a journey of hope of the countries that are supported by the African Development Fund. To give greater hope, to cope with increasing challenges, the ADF countries need greater resources. One way to achieve this is to allow the African Development Fund to use its accumulated equity of $25 billion to leverage $33 billion from the capital markets. Then the fund will be able to deliver more. The fund will provide greater leverage for donor contributions, a greater value for money for taxpayers from all of the donor countries. The fund will become more sustainable as it will generate more income. The fund will reduce debt of countries as it will deliver much lower concessional lending rates compared to the very high rates these countries get on the global capital markets. Then together, we will build a more equitable growth and development from the middle-income countries to the low-income countries and to the fragile states. No development of any country will be left behind.
Well, the meetings were officially opened by President Akufo-Addo yesterday, where he called for Africa to develop its own economic model and fight for our interests, emphasizing Africa beyond aid.
At the end of these meetings, Africa expects a framework that reconciles people and planet for peace. We cannot fail the people and the planet. Both must win. But for this to happen, Africa must win. Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come to move towards an economic model which serves our interests, not others. Profits from our resources have benefited foreign creditors for far too long. Now more than ever, it has become urgent to take the necessary steps to transition us towards become a resilient continent. Africa must exploit her productive capacities collectively and build the capacity of her continental development banks in order to realize the Africa we want and an Africa beyond aid.
And that was the president opening the AFDB meetings yesterday. Let's discuss this. Joining me on Zoom, Dr. Daniel Amate-Nim, who is Executive Director, Policy Initiative for Economic Development, and Isaac Hubert Arthur, who is also Executive Director of the Africa Center for International Trade and Development. Great to have you both on our program this afternoon. I want to start with the president's message at the opening of the AFDB meetings yesterday, his hopes of an Africa beyond aid. What would it take to achieve that, Dr. Nim?
Thank you very much. Africa beyond aid is possible, but it demands that we do a lot of work. Number one, we need a very strong inter-Africa trade. Secondly, we need to mobilize our own resources and do a lot of investment with our own capital. And another thing, in my humble opinion, I think it will help is for the continent to be able to leverage on the resources that we have. That is by adding value to our resources rather than exporting them in a raw state. So we need that collective collaboration as a continent, as a bloc, to be able to achieve Africa beyond aid. We should be able to negotiate as a bloc, not as individual countries. And as a bloc, we should be able to employ professionals, technical people that will be able to push that agenda. And the last on the list is that strong political commitment to be able to drive the continent to a level where we could achieve Africa beyond aid.
And Isaac, the president talks about fighting for our own interests. One of the areas we have tried to do that is in the area of trade. How successful do you think we have been?
Yes, in terms of trade, I would say we have been bullied over the period. Bullied over the period in the sense that if you take the EU as a bloc, they would prefer to negotiate with Ghana, negotiate with Nigeria, as against negotiating with the ECOWAS. In doing so, they have a competitive edge. And so in terms of trade, we've not done so well because, number one, we've not been able to add value to what we export with other economies or with other blocs. The next aspect of the whole thing is about that collective bargaining power. We bargaining as a bloc rather than as individual countries. So to answer you in terms of trade, I'm of the view that we deserve more than what we currently have achieved from other blocs or from other advanced economies.
I'd love to hear your thoughts too, Isaac Hubert Arthur, who has also joined us on Zoom. Isaac.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think on trade, I would say that we are on the right path, and with the implementation, the current implementation of the AFCFTA, I believe that Africa is on the right path. I mean, for a very long time, we have been under the multilateral trading system, and we really haven't seen much development in Africa. The Doha development agenda is still what it is. Nothing, has been achieved so far from the Doha development agenda, which seeks to, support developing and least developing countries to also develop, especially with the implementation of aid for trade. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened. So if we have taken our destiny in our own hands and we have introduced the African Continental Free Trade Area, I believe that we are doing what we are supposed to be doing. What we now need is to focus on the implementation. Make sure that this doesn't become one of the numerous trade agreements that are being signed, but this will be one that indeed was actually made by Africans, and we are implementing it ourselves. And we need to focus on developing the industrialization, capacity that we've been looking for. This should help us to be able to connect our borders, to ensure that there's regional integration. It becomes more effective, especially looking at the regional blocks, and then also continentally. We have a lot of challenges with the AFCFTA, I must say, but we are still very optimistic that as countries begin to, engage more with each other, and then also, start the implementation of the AFCFTA, especially on trade facilitation, is going to lower some of the, the non-tariff barriers, and then also the technical barriers that we have, so that at least there'll be more trading within the continent. So I think, yes, on trade, we are not doing bad. We just need to focus and let private sector really have a major interest and a major contribution in this implementation of the FCFTA. Because at the end of the day, it's our own businesses,
right,
our own philanthropists who are going to support us. That brings us to domestic resource mobilization. If we do not want to be dependent on the Bretton Woods institution, then what it means is that we ourselves must generate our own, revenue, and then we must also be able to mobilize domestic support, especially from the private sector. And that is we could really do that. But I doubt that we'll be able to stay away completely, at least for now, from the Bretton Woods institution. Most of the projects that are being implemented to even support the AFCFTA. I mean, these are the same people who are supporting us, funding most of the projects. So,
All right.
I mean, that should tell you it's quite a challenging moment, but I believe that, once we begin to deepen this conversation and then push for domestic resource mobilization, we may be able to take our destiny in our own hands.
And Dr. Neem, the president talks about an economic model for Africa. What would that look like? What would that entail?
Yeah, thank you very much. Even before I answer this one, I make a point in respect of AFTA. For the fact that you have the Bretton Woods institutions and other advanced economies supporting you from your initial stage is an avenue for future disaster, so to speak. Or it's a way that the AFTA will be owned by such people. And that's the reason which I'll narrow it to an economic model. The kind of economic model that we need as a continent is an economic model where we can mobilize our own resources to be able to drive our own development agenda. If as a continent, as a bloc, you do not have resources, so about let's say 60% or 70% of your own resources to drive your own development, and the bulk of the resources is coming from outside, you could be taking off your growth trajectory. The reason because they also have an agenda. Their primary motive is to develop their economy, is to suppress Africa, and that has been the norm, that has been the development architecture over the period. So to be able to deconstruct that architecture, number one, you need to mobilize your own resources, you need to finance your own development, and you need to add value to whatever you produce as a continent. To me, these are the critical elements that must be in any economic model that will transform Africa, or that will move Africa or beyond the aid agenda. So these are some of the things that we ought to be done. Recently, I read that even the United Kingdom wanted to help us devise some strategy for AFTA and also to fund AFTA. Recently, we all know that the Britain exit from the EU bloc, and they are looking for Africa or they've seen Africa as a very huge market. And some of these initiatives, as much as on the surface it looks good, there is a hidden agenda behind it, and that's the reason which we need to own our own development. And by owning your own development, you need to drive it with your own resources, and that is critical. If you are solely depend on other people or other institutions to drive your own development, and that's the reason which the call by our finance minister that the African Development Bank should be able to mobilize so much to support the continent. To me, I see it as a call in the right direction. If you don't do that, you are off the track, and that has been architecture over the period. If you analyze economic history of Africa, that has been the case.
Right. And as we conclude this conversation, I want to turn over to you, Isaac. You talk about the fact that you don't think that we can completely wean ourselves off the help of Bretton Woods institutions just yet. But we've got to begin from somewhere. We've started with trade. And as the leaders meet during the days of this week, what sort of outcome do you expect?
Well, I mean, I will expect that an institution like the AFDB will actually be an African, of course, we know it's an African institution, but we expect that they will begin to really focus on Africa and then fund projects that are very practical projects that will bring about our transformation. Not funding projects that really do not, do not contribute to solving the current problem that we have. We have problems in Africa. Even considering trade, why are we allowing these same Bretton Woods institutions to be funding even country strategies for implementation of the AFCFTA? It's you can't just understand. So we need the African institutions like the AFDB, like the Afghan banks, to really show and take up the initiative to fund most of the development projects that we have. We need them. There are so many of them. Countries are struggling, developing even export strategies, AFCFTA strategies, industrialization strategies. And when those strategies have been developed, they need to be implemented. Now, we need special free zones in Africa. Who is going to fund the development of special free zones? And when those free zones have been developed, who are going to be the investors? Are we going to bring investors outside the continent to come and invest into our own country or into our own continent? Whilst we have a number of billionaires in Africa, so I think that these institutions must really wake up. Whatever shackles is holding them, that is really not making them begin to narrow down on the actual problem that we have in this continent. They should begin to do so. Because until our institutions free themselves from external influences and begin to actually become practical, even with their funding, we will still be talking about these same issues years to come.
Okay.
So we need AFDB. By the close of this week, they must really get closer to AFCFTA Secretariat, to African Union, and then begin to look at what are some of the initiatives, what are some of the projects that they need to support the implementation of the AFCFTA, so they can begin to roll out some funding opportunities.
All right, we need to end it here. Thank you so much, Executive Director of ASINTAD, Isaac Hubert Arthur. Also appreciate your time with us. Dr. Amate Enim, who is the Executive Director of the Policy Initiative for Economic Development. We're watching the marketplace. Later in the day, we expect the launch of the African Economic Outlook by the AFDB, also a conversation on building resilient digital economies for Africa. And that takes us to our next story. A 2019 study by the International Finance Corporation estimated about 230 million jobs across the region will require digital skills by 2030, and more than 9 million of those jobs will be in Ghana. Unfortunately, less than 10% of workers fit any of these jobs. This afternoon, we have the story of an innovator who dropped out of school to learn robotics and how he is changing the face of STEM by inculcating in students the industry skill of science and technology.
Jonathan Kennedy Sowa has an aim: improving Ghana's STEM systems through innovative and free educational services.
So, when I was in school, it started with ICT. So the school wasn't teaching ICT well. We were not using the computers and all that. We weren't having computers, and it was taught on the blackboard. So I had to stop school in JHS 1, around 30 years old, then to start working at an internet cafe. Yes. So it was true that I got to know about robotics. So when I came to the school, I decided that we start a club. We teach programming because the school wasn't teaching programming. Our curriculum doesn't teach programming. And then we participated in competitions. We trained some girls to participate in the MTN Apps Challenge in 2018. And then they came out successful. They didn't win the ultimate prize, but they won an innovative award that gets back. So I think the challenge is that when students are able to see the relevance of what they are learning, they are able to relate it to the real world. They get empowered and inspired to learn more. This is the close side. It picks, and then the arm side that lifts it.
So this can be used on construction
sites,
disaster points, everywhere.
Everywhere.
I've come here to the Laboni Senior High School to meet Jonathan, interact with students of his association. This is where his dream started, as a young student of the senior high school in the ICT lab with no infrastructure. Today, Jonathan can boast of improved learning and association skills that beefs up the interests of these young students.
During the COVID, we tasked them to come out with innovations that can stop the spread of COVID-19. And then they built a smart hand sanitizer. So you don't have to touch the sanitizer and all that. You just have to put your hand under it. And they built it from recycled plastics and all that. Yes.
Digital skills are critical in the 21st century. Development post-COVID-19 has placed the world of work on innovation, STEM, and robotics.
The future of work is changing. And then most occupations require STEM skills. So the skills we are building these students with are skills that the future occupations need.
We are expecting more of the infrastructure so that many students will develop interest in the program.
Harriet Clue Jackson is head of department for the ICT department at the Labone Senior High School.
We are praying that if God willing, we'll have the kits and then the facilities to teach the children. Most of them will do very well, and then STEM will grow as they have purposed.
The STEM industry in Ghana is burdened, though young, shrouded with several challenges, including the exposure of young roboticists who are unable to navigate the trends of doing business in the country. This is a challenge that Jonathan seeks to solve. Through his company, InnovTech STEM Center, the young lad crisscrosses several schools in the country to teach students and teachers the intricacies of STEM education through robotics.
So what's happening now?
Okay, so we are connecting. It was connected yesterday. It wasn't able to establish the connection.
Right. So how can we replicate this in larger quantities to be used in Ghana? It can
so
be
the same type of robots.
Like making a bigger, so making this one the form by which it can be used on construction sites across the country.
Yes, it can be used. This is actually like the prototype.
This is a prototype.
Yes,
so it can be replicated.
Yes,
in a
so
much more bigger.
Yes, so with the analogy with this one, these ones it's the advanced part. So they can just fabricate the metals, get the electronic components, and then build up their own.
That's great.
Moving it in an angle and all that, it deals with a lot of physics here.
I see. So all these things I'm doing here has to do with physics.
Physics, a lot of physics. Yes, please.
Wow, and that's refreshing if you ask me. As we mark Africa Day, we cannot lose sight of Africa's booming tech industry. So let's talk tech. I'm joined by lead for Eyes of Africa, Henry Kobler. Let me just read a few pointers for you about our tech industry. Ghana's tech ecosystem has experienced tremendous growth in recent years, with 2021 seeing a record number of investments. Tech startups across the continent received $4.8 billion of investments, with the emergence of at least 5 new tech unicorns, startups valued at $1 billion. And that's just a few of the things that we have achieved in the tech space. I want to bring in Henry Kobler. And so for this Wednesday, as we talk tech, I just thought we could celebrate our tech ecosystem and what we have been able to accomplish. And it looks impressive, Henry. You are muted.
Yes, thank you very much. So there's been a lot of work that's gone into the African startup community. I mean, a lot of hard work from very young lads, being able to achieve amazing, a lot of investment getting into some of these startups. And if you're looking at the solutions, which is more particular for me, I think that it's solving major problems. If you're looking at startups like Flutterwave, that's sort of looked at as a unicorn in terms of what has been able to achieve, cutting across fintech over Africa, innovative solutions, making payments seamlessly easy. Just within their own way, it makes it better. We're having people in terms of the farmer line in Ghana where they're doing amazing in terms of the agriculture sector and having major investment flowing into their startups. ZPay looking at payments. Quite a lot of them, especially in Ghana, solving petty problems. I think that it makes it better, in terms of what Africa is really ready to achieve in terms of the minds that are around. What I can only look out for is the policies and then the environment that comes around some of these startups to grow, because I think that becomes the major challenge in terms of
and so in terms of policy and the environment, what do they need?
Generally, if you're starting businesses in Africa, it should be a very simple process where the tax regimes should be a bit relaxed for some of these startups. It's a bit of thing in talk and in policy document, but in terms of realities, when you have to walk into GRA, especially in Ghana, it's a different conversation altogether. In terms of the leveling, in terms of the raw materials and all of these things. You just showed robotics. Bringing in some of these fabricated robots and other things really will cost you an arm. And so in terms of all of that, the environment to relatively relax and make sure that the young blood can go through and produce easily is very important. There are always times where you have technology preceding policies, say in terms of cryptocurrency markets and all of that. And so you would have a lot of people getting into the blockchain technologies, but really are just frustrated because there's no policy from either the regulators to sort of guide them through what they have to do. And so they've sort of always been in the middle of everything, and then they will just be caught up by the laws because there's just some policy that is raising up. Again, also because I like to plot taxes, but again, it also has to deal with the good frequencies. And so we're having some of the levels of taxes, I mean, running around some of the startups, it becomes a bit difficult for them to implement. And so for me, it's more about the policy, even as simple as company registration to as major as tax filings and all of this, which I know the government is doing a lot to make sure that they are easy. I think that is also a bit of an intentional process to sort of give some level of leverage or set up committees or some sites to make sure that, I mean, anybody that's sort of bringing in some of these businesses is not political, but it's sort of looking at solving the real problems. I've seen a lot of innovations and funding go out to a lot of people who definitely are not any way bringing in any of these innovative solutions to it, because it would always expose you if you're not building a real-time product, you would always be in the room.
Okay, and I mentioned in my intro that the AFDB meetings today, they're going to be looking at building digital economies, resilient digital economies. And so if they're watching this afternoon, what do you have to tell them about the role of tech?
So tech is really Africa's chance to really be up there again. I mean, avoid anything mines or, I mean, all these natural resources. Tech is the next big thing that we sort of need to build up on. We're at the level where we have almost every resource like the internet and all of that to sort of leapfrog and make a lot out of it. I think that what I could just tell them is that they should just really look at the policies that guides most of these developments that gets around. A lot of people have a lot of interest in these tech platforms. I don't think that we have to build an intentional ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that builds by itself.
All right.
And so it's more the intentional support that comes around it to make sure that it works. Yeah.
All right. Happy Africa Day, Henry. And that's the marketplace. Thanks for watching. More news on our website at JoyNews.com.